Hello, all. Thank you for taking time out of your no doubt busy day to join us to talk about craft and writing. I am Wami, your interviewer for the afternoon, and with me I have Martha Wells, the guest of honor of Confluence. As many of you probably already know, she's the author of the series, The Books of the Raksura, the Illyrian series, as well as YA fantasy novels, short stories, media tie-ins, and some nonfictions. She has a new series called The Murderbot Diaries, published by Tor.com, and I'll be asking some questions about this as well. She's won a Nebula Award, 2 Hugo Awards, and 2 Locus Awards, among many others. Thank you for joining us today as well, Martha. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing great.
It's good to have you here. So I'll just get into it. I know you've probably been asked this before, but I feel like the answer to craft questions is always changing in our creative process and our creative development. So what does your process look like? And less the writing part, more like the pre-writing part. I tend to like to look at other writers and see how they set up the mood for the writing, especially if I'm trying to channel a specific vibe in my prose. Do you do something similar?
I do something a lot similar, especially with fantasy. I spend a lot of time looking at images. I used to especially look at the Atlas Obscura website a lot. It's a kind of weird travel site. And just looking at old ruins and strange landscapes and things like that, or at least strange to me, you know, interesting pictures. And it doesn't have to be real things. It can be Photoshop stuff or whatever. Kind of looking for the mood of the different places I'm going to try to describe. I also do kind of the thing that, I don't know, I used to do it a lot as a kid, where you see some like weird rock formation or something and you start thinking about, well, what if that was a castle? You know, and you think about people that would live there and you know, just stuff like that. I didn't do it as much for the Murderbot. Murderbot was very character driven. So I just got the idea for the plot and that it was going to have to be a science fiction story. And so I kind of just launched into it and did a lot of the world building as I was going along, which is not something I usually do for fantasy.
Yeah. You did say that it was character driven, and like one of my questions was like, was the first spark for this series the world, or how you saw our own world, our contemporary world moving forward, or did it begin with Murderbot itself, the character?
It was kind of a combination of both. Murderbot, the character, very much so, and then kind of coming up with, I knew what I wanted the character's problem to be. I knew it was going to be an enslaved, part human, part machine security unit. So I had to come up with the kind of world that would like let that happen, and also the kind of world that that it would escape from. And so just thinking, and a lot of stuff, contemporary things went into that. I mentioned last night, someone asked about this on the opening ceremonies, that I wrote it in 2016, and I had a lot of anger in specific at that time about what was going on in our country, but also in the world in general, and also buildup of anger, like pretty much my entire life. So I took a lot of that anger and put it into Murderbot. Fortunately, when I'm very angry, I tend to also hit a point where I get really sarcastically funny. So that came out in the character too.
Yeah, absolutely. Murderbot is a delightful narrative voice, and not at all something I would expect from an AI construct. So honestly, it really made the character. And I did want to ask if if you struggled with coming up with this voice, but it seems like it was pretty organic in terms of channeling your anger into it.
Yeah, it was very organic. And just as soon as I started it, it was, that's usually my problem when I write is if I get an idea and everything first before the character, trying to figure out the voice to express it in. And once I get the voice, then it's a lot easier to do it.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, somebody pointed out that the cover for All Systems Red, which I don't think I have handy right now, but it's very much, Murderbot with the faceplate down and just in the armor, and the cover looks very much like what you would expect, the scary Murderbot that wants to kill everybody looks like. And then as soon as you open the first page, the voice starts and you realize that's not what this being is at all.
Yeah.
And actually the book got labeled as robot horror a couple of times really early on. And I was like, robot horror. And it's like, obviously they're going by the cover and kind of just winging it for their description in the magazine or whatever. So, but that was kind of funny that that it worked out like that.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And we've already talked a little bit, or you've already talked a little bit about how, what some of the differences are between your process of writing fantasy and between your processes of writing science fiction. So definitely I would want to try to pick your mind about what some of those challenges were, and more than the challenges, what were some of the pleasant surprises about that process?
Well, with the science fiction, I'm working a lot more also I'm working first person, and it's a very tight POV from Murderbot. So you're only really seeing things it sees and it's thinking about, and it's sort of exploring the world for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It's seen some stuff, but mostly mining colonies and mostly workspaces, and it hasn't really been to that many places where there are that humans live or that people would want to go to voluntarily, basically. So just kind of being able to, it has a good excuse to tell the reader what it's seeing and doing and what it's experiencing for the first time. You don't have to have it makes the exposition a lot better when your character and your reader are experiencing things for the first time together. And that's often different with fantasy because I'm writing a character, and even if it's a character who's exploring a new place, they still know an awful lot about their world that they don't have a reason to stop and do the whole, as you know, Bob, this is what, this is how we mail a letter in the post office or whatever. But so that's different with fantasy. And I've been working on some fantasy now that I haven't done for a few years since I finished the last Raxura book. And so just remembering that, oh yeah, I need to develop all this stuff first. I need to think about what these places look like. Everything has to have a name. And it's a lot more of a, especially I'm in third person POV again. So it's a lot more complex for me, at least, than it is just doing this first person, doing first person through Murderbot.
And I don't know if it's fair to ask which one you enjoyed more.
It's kind of weird because it's usually the thing I'm working on now is usually the thing I enjoy most. So especially after I'm getting close to finishing it. When I'm just starting it, a lot of times, especially when I'm in the middle, when the middle is usually the slog, the place where you're like, why am I working on this? I could be doing anything else. I want to do something else, So yeah, it's usually the thing I'm working on now. And I'm working in third person again, so I kept thinking, it was so much easier to do first person. And of course with Murderbot, it isn't particularly, it's a little bit easier, but also Murderbot has that omniscient viewpoint where it sees things through all the different security cameras. So I have to always take in all these different, it makes the fight scenes very complicated. So I have to take in all these different factors of things that it would be looking at, through its different systems. And so it's usually doing 4 or 5 different things at the same time. And I have to try to convey that. And that makes logistically action scenes so much more complicated. So I think by the time of the fantasy, I start getting into action scenes where I'm just writing one person, just worrying about what they're doing. It will feel much easier.
Yeah. I can imagine. There's so many shifts in POV, and I think that was one of the things I most enjoyed and most benefited from, seeing this way of how an artificial construct could possibly even shift perspective. It hadn't been something that had occurred to me, so that was very neat to see on the page.
Oh, well, cool. I'm glad it worked out. Uh,
Yeah,
that's kind of become, I think, a big hallmark of the character. Um,
yeah,
and also, I'm trying to show it's a being that thinks a lot. It thinks a lot faster than a normal human brain would. So trying to get that across is kind of difficult. And I think hopefully that's worked too. It presents some interesting challenges.
yeah. Um, we actually have our first Q&A question
Oh,
that is
okay.
about Murderbot itself. And they ask, is Murderbot a metaphor for how many people exist in society today, driven by external forces such as corporations and consumerism, out of touch with emotion and their own humanity?
I don't think it's a metaphor at all. I mean, it's a character um, that's very much driven by its own emotions. So
Yeah,
I don't think it's um, it's not really isolated from that. It is at the mercy of a capitalist system that's completely out of control, where there are absolutely no checks and balances, or very few. There's no protections for people, there's no protections, especially for a construct, which is what it is. So that's part of it, but it's not that the character is a metaphor for anything in particular.
yeah. I definitely thought that some of the most compelling details were the ones that brought forward its nature of humanity and how it starts to discover all of these different facets of its personality, especially the bits about the TV shows.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful, and it's such a specific detail that makes me picture Murderbot as kind of like this grandmotherly character that always on the dot has to catch their TV show.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in there, and it's really fun to write.
Yeah, yeah. And we also have, oh, this is an interesting question. Um, Someone's intrigued by how Murderbot exists outside the construct of gender and how readers sort of project what they expect onto it. Was that an interesting writing challenge for you?
It wasn't really a challenge with the character, because pretty early on I kind of realized, if the way I'm developing this, there's no reason for this really soulless company to give the constructs a gender, because it's just not, it's not something that's practical, and they wouldn't do it. Um, and the fact that I wanted Murderbot to be comfortable with that. Um, that's how it's always been. Um, and it's interesting how different people react to that. People use different gendered pronouns for Murderbot. I had a friend that when the book, the All Systems Red, first came out, she went through Goodreads and she actually did a percentage of how many people referred to Murderbot as him, how many as her, and how many used they or something else, and how many just tried to skip it altogether and not deal with it. So that was really funny. Um, the one thing I get annoyed by is the people will ask me, well, what gender is Murderbot? It's like, well, it tells you in the it tells you in the book. It tells you flat out. Um, and it's done that in a couple different books. Like there's a secret, and then well, what gender is it secretly? It's like there's no secret. It's in the book.
It's a non-issue.
Um, yeah, and so that's been an interesting journey for me. I've never done a character like that before, but it's been an interesting learning experience.
I definitely found myself while reading having to deconstruct my own sort of assumptions, because I think as readers, maybe our first assumption is that the protagonist is male or something like that. And I kept catching myself thinking, wait, why am I assuming this when Murderbot repeatedly establishes itself as this non-gendered construct? And that was a very fun experience because I kept questioning myself as a reader and being like, why do you keep coming back to this? Why is this your first assumption?
It's really interesting how ingrained that is, even when we know better. It's really strange. I noticed when I did the Books of the Raxura, they have non-gendered names. And I got a couple of comments I thought was very weird at the time, as people, they couldn't tell the characters apart. And it's like, well, they're all, and I finally realized it's because they're non-gendered names. They don't, and that's, I guess, it's a cue for us in reading, and it was something I had never thought of before. But yeah, it is really interesting how that's so ingrained in our culture.
Yeah, and it's like I myself have experimented with trying to tell narratives where there's not a gendered protagonist, and even so, I get caught in my own trap. That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's
very unfortunate.
It's interesting, and it's just kind of it's an interesting mental exercise to kind of realize that that's what you've been doing. When I first read Ancillary Justice, and at the beginning we find out that the dominant culture uses she, her for everybody, and then you have and for a while you're like, well, trying to visualize the characters going, is she a guy, or is she is she a woman? And you're like, it doesn't matter. That's what the whole point. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I love that book.
It's very insidious.
Yes.
So we've got a question in the chat, not in the Q&A, that says, that I'm interested in too. Are you considering perhaps following or telling the stories of those Murderbot encounters like Sec Unit 3? I'd love to hear about its evolution. That's from Catherine.
I haven't yet. I just finished, well, not just, I finished another Murderbot novella called, and actually I'm going to read from it at my reading, which is the next hour slot after this, or it's a half-hour reading. It's called Fugitive Telemetry, and it's another novella, and it's actually a prequel to Network Effect. So that's the last Murderbot thing currently that I've done. I haven't really decided yet what I'm going to do. I should have decided it by this time, but between the plague and the apocalypse and all the other stuff going on, I haven't really gotten very much done.
I don't think anyone will fault you. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's very odd online. You see people who seem to be just working normally and saying, well, I'm finished this and I finished that. And then you see other people like going like, I'm laying out my backyard because I don't know what to do. And it's like, I'm in the backyard people group. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, right now I don't know what the next Murderbot story will be. I'm certainly not going to say there won't be one, because I kind of doubt I'm through with that world, but I'm not really sure what direction I want to go yet. I've played with some ideas that I haven't been able to make work. And honestly, at this point, I'm not sure if that's because they're not good ideas or just because I'm so stressed out. It's very difficult for me to give these ideas the concentration they need. So, because Murderbot can be kind of hard to write because of all the logistics involving it. It usually, even for like one of the novellas, which are only, their standard novella length is under 40,000 words, and most of the Murderbot novellas are anywhere from 34,000 to, I think, 38,000 words. And those take me usually about 3 months to do, just because just the logistics can be so difficult.
Yeah, yeah. There are definitely some people in the Q&A who seem to be voting for more development for art.
I kind of do want to go back and do a prequel story about art, and maybe Art and its crew, which would be fun.
Yeah, I would
That's
love
an
to see
option.
art again.
Yeah, art's a lot of fun.
I was a little sad that they had to separate, but it is one of the characters I would have liked to see again. So I vote in pro of that.
Well, art comes back in Network Effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, let's see. Oh, does Murderbot have the Superman problem? Do you have to make sure they're not too powerful?
I haven't. I think when you create your world, you have to kind of take the Superman uh, problem into account there. You have to make sure you're not, um, that you're making antagonists and bad guys that are, and challenges, whether those challenges are um, from other people in the world or from the environment or whatever's going on for your character. You have to make sure your world building is challenging enough for your character. So I haven't really had that problem, because as a Murderbot's pretty good against an ordinary human, but when you start adding all the technology that's available and other bots, Murderbot's not like, Murderbot's come up against combat bots and combat sec units, which are in some ways are much scarier than combat bots, just within the context of the four novellas. So you don't know what else is out there in the world.
Yeah.
So it hasn't really been an issue. That's just something I think you have to, or at least I always try to keep in mind when I'm world building, is that, yeah, you don't want to end up with a character that's so powerful that it's not fun anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're challenging for them.
I think like Murderbot is physically powerful, but as you said, um, at the beginning of the series, they're not very worldly. So they're
Yeah.
coming up against all of these foreign things, and those are different problems to take on.
Yeah, there's a lot they don't know, or there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot Murderbot doesn't know about what's going on.
Okay. There are a lot of questions about Murderbot. Um, okay, let's take some of them, and then maybe we can take some of the ones about the Raxura series, if that's okay with you.
Oh, that's fine.
All right, so there's one question that says, can you talk a bit about where the character Dr. Mensa came from? It's so lovely to read about an older woman in a competent, even badass leadership role.
Yeah, I noticed when I started, I'm in my mid 50s now. I noticed that the lack of older women characters, there are some, it's not like there's none, but it feels like they just aren't as visible. Um, and so I've done that before. I've done older women characters earlier in my fantasy, and like Will the Infinite, the protagonist is probably about the same age as Dr. Mensa. Um, and so, yeah, that just kind of, I wanted the leadership. I wanted to do a lot of women in the rest of the team, and I wanted the leader to be a woman. And so Dr. Mensa kind of grew out of that, and kind of grew out of that the first scene I wrote for All Systems Red was the scene when she knocks on the cubicle wall and starts talking to Murderbot like it's just another employee, another member of the team, which kind of changes the whole dynamic in the group. And I'm just thinking about the kind of person who would do that, and would do that very confidently, who would be able to get past, the scary sec unit mythos, basically, and just walk in there and do this. Kind of created her character for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I did appreciate how many of the characters um, were strong women. That was definitely one thing that lent to my enjoyment of reading this series.
Oh, well, cool. I've been trying to do that. It was pretty easy with the Rexura novels, since so many of the, just the way the society is structured, there's a lot of female characters. Um, and I started trying to do it more consciously, instead of, especially I wrote a Star Wars novel, I think in 2014, Star Wars Razor's Edge, where Princess Leia was the main character. And so I was trying to do a thing where, instead of even with minor characters, they're just mentioned once or twice, instead of always defaulting to a male character as being really aware of what I was doing. It's like, well, this can just as easily be a woman as a man. So I've been trying to do that for a while. And really thinking about the, because there's that weird thing where you'll have like 10 men and 2 women, or 2 or 3 women, and people say, well, there's all these women. Yeah. Well, there's not. There's not even a quorum of women. There's just like 3. And somehow they're just taking over. So, and trying to keep the numbers more balanced, and like they would be more in reality.
Yeah, and that ties into our earlier discussion about how we perceive Murderbot as a gendered being. Yeah. The next question is from Billy Knight, and they ask, in the Murderbot universe, it seems like bots have just as much sentience and feelings as humans. Is that just Sec Unit's point of vision?
No, there is, there's levels of sentience for all the different bots, and it depends on what their job is. Like something that the drones have probably the lowest level. So they're kind of, it's more like interacting with a bird or something that has specific things it can do. Then like the bots that are just there to pick things up and move them have a slightly, have a lower level of sentience, while something that a bot that would have to do something really complex job like would have much more. So Murderbot sees sentience in everything, basically, to a certain extent, because it can see it. It's there. The humans probably don't see it nearly as much, unless they're humans who actually work with the bots and it's kind of like the way, well, I can't really think of a good example now. The way that, it's a little bit like we anthropomorphize everything, or at least people with a lot of empathy will anthropomorphize everything, because then that's how they interact with the world. Except in Murderbot's case, there is reciprocity. God, I wish I could come up with words I can't say. Reciprocity. That's it. Back, because it is interacting on certain levels with all these other bots and technological systems and everything that are out there.
Yeah, I definitely perceive that, especially in terms of its interactions with art. There's this one moment, I believe, when they're both watching this TV series together, and Art gets really emotional about the ones that like kill the human crews and are based on true stories, and they do this like metaphorical hand-holding thing. That scene was so hilarious to me.
Yeah, and that's because Art had not really experienced the media like that before, so it was really getting to it. Somebody asked me one time about why Art is so angry. It's so mean to other systems. It's like their first encounter with something, Art wants to delete it all the time. And I was like, it's like, because Art is it's a very, very advanced system, and it has to and it has a thing where it's kind of aggressive because it's a gunship. So it's making sure other systems know who is the boss.
Yeah.
In interaction with this other system, it has to know that I'm going to be the one who is making the decisions. So that's why it comes across like that.
A little bit like an overexcitable chihuahua. Yeah. There's someone who's asking, if you were casting Murderbot for the movie, who would you want to audition?
I don't know. I'm really bad with actors' names. I mean, I know the people in shows I like, and I'll forget like 15 minutes later.
Yeah, me too.
I would not make a good casting director or anything like that. The thing I think about is I would like it to be someone who is doesn't really like, I can't remember now. I can't remember her name. The lady who played Batwoman in the series, in the CW series, someone who, depending on how they're dressed and made up, has either masculine or feminine features. someone who's kind of androgynous, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
getting at. Because I'd like to try to, if there was a movie or a TV or anything, I'd like to kind of keep that feeling of,
Yeah.
I don't want to think of them, this person's male or female. I just want to think of them as a person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know how possible that is visually as opposed to, you know, a book or an audiobook. But yeah, I can't think of, I know people have talked about, of course I don't have her name anymore either. She was in Game of Thrones. She was the warrior woman. She's quite tall in real life. And she's
Oh,
also in
Brienne,
Star Wars.
the one that plays Brienne.
Yeah, and then she was in Star Wars as the stormtrooper supervisor that was really tough and everything. See, that's why I don't know actors' names. So it's like, I was on a panel one time where we had to like suggest actor. I don't know how I ended up on it, like casting for books. Like people would say like, oh, you know, this book, and now name the cast that was in it. And we were just saying, like, God, we don't know. We don't know. It's a lot harder if you're not someone who naturally remembers actors' names and what the parts they do and stuff. I think it's really difficult.
Yeah, I did look at the question in the Q&A and I was like, oh, I don't know if I should ask this because I myself would have such a hard time answering that.
Oh, and actually the one person I could cast, I think, is Dr. Mensah. And I've always thought, as soon as I started watching it on Black Lightning, the lady who plays the mother, she's a research medical scientist. I think she would make a really good Dr. Mensah. You know, of course, there's a lot of people out there who would, but she sort of like has the look that I was kind of imagining. She's got her hair done the same way, so.
Yeah, that's really cool. Kind of tying into this question, someone else asked if the Murderbot Diaries would translate well into an animated series.
Oh yeah, probably would.
That might solve the whole androgyny issue.
Yeah. You just worry about the voice then, and you wouldn't have to worry so much about. You could make the people look like whatever they needed to look like.
Yeah. In terms of voice, quite a lot of people are asking about the audiobook, like if you had any creative input in that process, or people that did listen to All Systems Read and it was read by a male voice and it changed how they imagined Murderbot.
Yeah, I think again they were in kind of the same dilemma. It's like, well, who do you pick for this character? I really liked Kevin R. Free's performance. I thought he did a great job, and I didn't have anything. I think when I talked to him about it a little bit in email about how a motive to make the voice, but again, I know I'm not an acting person, so I'm not qualified to tell anybody how to do anything basically about that. I did approve him because basically sometimes what they'll do is they'll give you, what I've had with my other books is they'll give you a couple different people to listen to. I've only really questioned it one time when for Will the Infinite, I really wanted a Black woman narrator. Either, you know, usually they give the option British or US, and so I said either one, as long I really think it should be a Black woman narrator, and the casting director was like, oh, I know exactly who, and he got Lisa Renee Pitts, and she was perfect. She's absolutely perfect. With All Systems Read, Recorded Books said, well, how about Kevin R. Free, and they sent me some links to some of his other stuff, and it's like he had such I'd heard of him before from Welcome to Night Vale, but he had such a range. I thought, you know, I thought he would be great, and he was, or is. So
yeah, I think when it comes down to it, more so than focusing on how quote unquote gendered the voice may sound, whatever that means in all of its dimensions we can unpack, it should be more of a focus on what can this voice bring to the character, and what can this actor do to bring this character alive on the page, because
Yeah.
it's so difficult, I think, to really bring text alive, especially when you're shifting between dialogue and narrative. That's so complex.
And they have to do other characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just it's very complicated.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. All right, we have one question that says, I love that many of your protagonists, Tremaine, Moon, and Murderbot, for example, are outsiders, introverts, loners, underdogs, etc. Can you talk a bit about that?
I've always felt that about myself, particularly when I was growing up. So it feels like I'd always had the mindset of an outside observer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I write people. Also tend to do characters who have problems with anxiety, though it's not always as obvious as with Murderbot. Moon clearly has problems with depression and PTSD and some other things. So I always tended to write that. And I think, again, that's just the kind of the way my brain works. There's only so many ways I can imagine a mind functioning. That's not, when I don't, that's not something, I would probably have a lot more trouble writing someone who was just happy and normal than I would writing someone who was depressed.
Yeah, I think many writers are a strange combination of extroverted when amongst their own kind, but introverted at large.
Yeah, it's like the introvert extrovert thing never really fit me very well, I think, because yeah, I'm an introvert
Mm-hmm.
like 90% of the time, except when I'm with my group, and the people that understand each other and are talking about similar things, and then and suddenly it's a lot easier to interact.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I agree. So here we have a more general question that's about how your plotting process works. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Very much a
And I think you answered a little bit about this in
yeah,
terms of world development.
yeah, very much a pantser. I don't want to figure out too much of the book beforehand and it's partly because it's like I'll get bored with it. I like to kind of figure out the story as I'm going along to help keep my oops. Oh, okay. I got a weird screen for a second. Sort of. But so I can kind of figure out the story as it goes along. Also, if I start trying to figure out the story too much in advance, I won't be able to do that. I've noticed for my media tie-ins, I've had to do outlines. And the thing I've noticed about myself when I do outlines is it's pretty much impossible for me to figure out if a scene or action sequence is going to work when I'm not writing it. Because I'll sit there in outlines and say, okay, this is going to happen. And once I start writing, it's like, that's not going to work at all. And it's just like, I don't, until I'm actually like in the character's perspective, going through the scene, my brain isn't working to figure out all the different logistics and what's possible and what's not possible and what makes sense and what's not going to make sense as I go along. So, and also, that's a big factor. And also, it's really intimidating to me to try to figure out, I don't want to think about the book as a whole because I start panicking. It's like, that's 120,000 words. I can't do that. I can figure out what this person is going to do in the next scene or the next chapter or whatever. So I try to stay focused on that and just kind of build as I go along. So yeah, pantsing works so much better for me.
Yeah, at some point, the characters probably take over. And there's something to be said about, happenstance, things that just happen on the page when you're in the mood of writing, and suddenly you realize this is really working.
Yeah, and there's things like where the classic example is where you have the character make a mistake and think, no, they shouldn't do that. That's not going to be that's dumb. That's not going to work. And then they're like, oh, but what they did that, and then went, now I'm stuck because it was a natural mistake to make. And I, as the author, didn't figure it out until I'd had the character do it. And so the character is not going to figure it out until they do it and go, oh, wow, that was not a good idea. Because it's like not everyone's not going to be Jason Bourne and go through this whole sequence in perfect order. They're going to run into the wrong room. They're going to do something and go. They'll throw something away and go, oh, I needed that. You know, and that kind of thing. And that's the thing that really adds the complication that can make it really fun.
Yeah, it's like a double growth process there for the author and for the character.
Yeah, and also it's motivation. It's like I have these, at a certain point in the book, when you really start to get to know the characters, you know what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And so those are cool moments when you're coming along and something happens, and you're like, this character is not going to do this, or this character is going to do this. And that can really help you get further in and make the book more complex too.
Yeah, yeah. I really put stock into that more organic process.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one other general question that says, which satirist do you think influenced your writing?
Oh, I haven't read like talking about like my high school and college education, which was so long ago. Oh my God, dinosaurs were walking the earth. I don't think my sarcastic sense of humor probably comes from a lot more early influences from TV and movies and things like that than it would from
Literary influence.
Literary influence, yeah.
Yeah. Then I guess another question would be, in terms of like reading and writing, do you have any authors that are currently playing with FNSF in interesting ways or taking the genre in new directions that you'd recommend?
Oh yeah, I actually made a list earlier because it's like, yeah, I have trouble remembering names.
Yeah.
All the time. The book I just finished reading is Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliott, which is a space opera. It's the first volume of her space opera trilogy. Really love that. I'm not sure I'm doing her name right. It's Nghi Vo, who did their most recent book is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. Their novelettes did just pack the entire punch of an epic fantasy in novelette form. Zen Cho, I love all her books. She's just recently had a novella come out. Suzanne Palmer has done a couple of new science fiction novels. I think the latest one was Driving the Deep. I absolutely loved kind of science fiction mystery, which is like, I love mysteries, so it's like science fiction, fantasy mysteries are some of my favorites. C.L. Polk, I love her fantasy. Tade Thompson, who did the Rosewater trilogy, and he also has some horror novellas that are really good and creepy. But the Rosewater trilogy, those books just blew me away. Like kind of near future alien invasion. Karen Lord, oh, she I loved her earlier books. The oh God, now I can't remember. I'm looking at it across the room. The best of all possible worlds. That's one of my favorite books. And also her most recent is called Unraveling, which is kind of a fantasy mystery where basically it's a serial killer mystery that the lawyers working on the case think they've solved, but these other characters who are supernatural figures come in and start and realize it's not right. That's not what all happened, and they go back and are basically causing these little pocket universes that relive these events to try to figure out who the real criminal is and what their motivation is. That's a fascinating book, and I absolutely loved it. And Cassandra Khaw, her horror books, The Cannibal Chef, those are so cool. And also a couple of mystery authors. Jeannie Lin has one. It's set in ancient China called The Hidden Moon. I'm reading that now. And Ovidia Yu is a Singaporean writer who has a couple of different mystery series, one in contemporary Singapore and then one back in Singapore under when it was occupied by the British. Really, really good books.
Thank you so much for the recommendations. And if anyone heard me clacking, it's because I was writing down some of them. We're running a bit out of time. I want to remind everyone that right after this, Martha has her reading. And one last question, I hope we have the time, is what can we look forward to? Are you currently working on something?
Well, the next Murderbot novella, the prequel to Network Effect, is coming out in April. And right now I'm working on fantasy, but again, I'm not sure if it's going to pan out. I'm just kind of, I'm really in a bad spot creatively right now. But also, I do have a short story coming out in Uncanny Magazine for the November issue. So that will be out, I think, November 1st. And it's a short fantasy story called The Salt Witch.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you and asking you some of these questions.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you too. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. There's someone in the chat who would really like the list. So I don't know if you could maybe email it to me and I can post it in the Discord.
Okay. Yeah, I've got your email address. So yeah, I'll try to do that. I'll do that after my reading.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to your reading.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to everyone who came.